Love finances, the other F word, and want to support the show? Become a patron by going to patreon.com/FTOFW. You'll get special features, a shout out on the air, and early releases. Or if you prefer, pick up some merchandise at financestheotherfword.com.
As fantastic a CFP as Mel O is, as wonderful an attorney as I am, and as good as Stormy is at whatever it is he does, please do note that anything said in our podcasts are our opinions alone and are not meant to be taken as financial or legal advice.
Welcome to Finances, the Other F Word, a Gen Xer podcast for musicians and music lovers, where we discuss money and music without all the pretentious bullshit. Here are your hosts, Zoe Terry, attorney at large, Stormy Andrews, founder of Yokel Local Marketing, and Mel O, certified financial planner and author of Finances, the Other F Word. Listener discretion is advised.
Today, we are continuing our series on defunding the police. Wherever you're at, get out there and vote, regardless, even if you're voting for the candidate that we don't like. Make sure that you get out there and vote. And by the time this airs, it'll still be pre-election. So, do your part, et cetera, et cetera. So let's get back to our ever-pressing series of updating the police, also known as defunding the police, but we've rebranded it. Yokel Local Marketing has rebranded it, and now it's called Updating the Police.
That was a Stormy thing. I didn't bring in any of my team members. I kind of did that one all on my own. But yeah, I think it's and I don't think it. Didn't I say it was
21st century police force?
Yeah, just modernizing. I think modernizing. Yeah, instead of updating, I think it's just modernizing. You know what? Everything in the world gets modernized. My marketing agency gets modernized. Cars gets modernized. And if we keep doing things the way we've always done it, that's not a form of modernization. So I think in a world where we can modernize the police as we're modernizing everything else, that would be a good thing.
So with all of the, what are we modernizing? Modernizing the police.
Correct.
Correct. That per Yokel Local Stormy.
21st century police force.
Right.
Let's see what we got.
Yep, per Yokel Local Stormy Andrews. Okay, so let's talk really quick about Camden, New Jersey. Camden, New Jersey is a city in New Jersey, and they actually got rid of their police department in 2013, way before any of this defunding the police movement even came around.
Wait, they got rid of their police department?
Yeah, they got rid of it and they replaced it with a completely different animal. So the population is about 42% Black and over 50% Latino, a very small white population in Camden. It had been repeatedly named one of America's most violent cities. The city's crime rate was among the worst in the U.S. And within 9 square miles, just to give you guys some quantitative numbers, within 9 square miles, there was about 75,000 residents. And in that 9 square miles, there was 170 open air drug markets reported in just 2013. And police corruption was rampant. Just to let you know how rampant it was, lawsuits were filed against the department on 3 things: for planting evidence on suspects, fabricating reports, and committing perjury. The police were committing perjury. After the corruption was finally brought to light and the government finally acknowledged it, they had to overturn the convictions of 88 people. Can you believe that shit?
Wow.
Yep. So in 2012, they voted to disband the entire police department. They were like, fuck it. We can't fix this. You guys are corrupt and bullshit. So we're going to completely overhaul it. And so they dissolved the police department, and it's a county police force. They did rehire 100 of the officers that were let go. They literally fired everybody. They did hire 100 of the original officers back, and all the city officials focused on 2 things mainly, and that was ending violent crime and then making citizens feel safe. And so since the reform that happened in 2013, violent crimes, now it's important because, you want to quantify this data. The stats have been provided by the department themselves. But it seems through reading through articles that most of the citizens have acknowledged that the crime rate has dropped. Violent crimes have dropped 42% in 7 years, and the crime rate has dropped from 79 per 1,000 to 44 per 1,000. So the reform that they did,
Wow.
yeah, which is actually really impressive, right? I mean,
that is impressive.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking violent crime, you guys. This isn't like, hey, give me your wallet. This is fucked up shit.
Right.
And so the new approach that they took focused on community problem solving versus the crime and punishment. And we talked about when the crime and punishment became the objective of the actual police force back in the day on the part one of this series that we did, where there was an actual shift between being a community protector to specifically trying to crime and punish people. And that was when a lot of people were trying to strike or riot, as the magnates would call it. And so now the new Camden police force goes through and they introduce themselves to the communities that they're patrolling. They've emphasized de-escalation techniques. They host community events. So there's a lot of warm and fuzzy pictures of officers, flipping burgers and shit at a barbecue and, different communities. And like I said, so now they're up to about 400 employees, but they did hire, out of all of the police department, they were able to hire 100 of them back. And in the area, there's still, some criticism from citizens, which I think mostly is bullshit. Number one is they said, oh, well, the officers still don't live in the area they serve. Okay, well, people live farther away now. You know what I mean? You can't fucking have like, oh, why don't we have a doctor living in my neighborhood then? Why don't we have, you're not always going to have a police officer living in your area. So some people are like, oh, the officers don't live where they serve. Okay, well, they don't. They have tried to improve diversity, but they're still saying that there is more, that they feel that the non-white population on the police force is not specifically shown, and that there is still crime. Well, yeah. I mean, of course, there's still crime. That was just stupid to me. But one of the things that I thought was really interesting is there was a podcast I listened to that was talking about affirmative action. And they were interviewing a whole bunch of companies, and they were saying, we would love to hire Black and brown people, but they are not applying for our jobs. And so I wonder if, when we see stuff like this and we say, oh, well, there's still predominantly white force, or there's not enough diversity, or it's not equal. Well, is that because they're specifically turning away Black and brown applicants? Or is that just because Black and brown applicants are not applying for the job? I don't know. I mean, it's one of those two-sided things. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so, but there was one Camden resident that had a quote that I thought was really apt. She said, we can't police our way out of social issues, unemployment, disappropriate health issues, and economic challenges. And those are the primary drivers of crime. I just thought, yeah, exactly. They can only do so much. The cops have basically said that, they had been there for 20 years, and then they switched it over. The liquidation, the department in Camden, the police department in Camden, had been in its old former self around for 142 years before they said, fuck it, we're just completely, redoing this, and we're wiping it off the face of the earth and starting new. And their whole goal, and this is going to become very important here in a second, is that Camden specifically was trying to always keep their safety budget at a level of about $65 million. And a lot of what they did when they actually eliminated the police department is they eliminated a lot of these obligations they had under the collective bargaining agreements. And that's good and bad. And I have some numbers to back up both sides of it. But that's what they did. And basically they saw that just in the Parkside area, within, the first 3 weeks to 6 weeks of it, they didn't have any gunshots in that area, any gun, anybody using a gun or anything over that period, which was a marked difference from where they came. And but the reason we see most of the cities who are kicking around the idea of defunding the police or modernizing the police, aka Yoko Local marketing, is the fact that it's costing so much money. And so in the last episode, we talked about how much of there's two different budgets that go on. There's the actual police budget, and then there's the general budget. So the general budget is the tax revenues that come in that it can be used at discretionary as discretionary, for whatever they want to use it for. And then they have the actual police budget. So you have the police department actually pulling from two separate budgets. And what we're seeing is that the cities that are starting to talk about it and starting to be open to it, quite frankly, it comes down to a money situation. So there's a couple cities that are looking at reform. And before I say that, there's other cities that have actually completely dismantled their police department because of money, but they are primarily, with the exception of Camden, they're primarily very small towns. And so like we have Deposit, New York, who basically had a whole police department that was costing $200,000 annually to them, and they got rid of it, and they have one sheriff's deputy that patrols the whole city. Garden City, Missouri, laid off its officers and suspended its police chief due to budgetary issues. Rio Vista, California, had half of its police staff quit, and the other half left for other jobs. So they basically had no police. So this was January of this year, and so they
all quit at the same time.
Yeah, like 50% of them quit, and then the other 50% just found different jobs. So obviously there's some kind of underlying story.
Right.
Yeah, but Rio Vista is just like, okay, fuck it. Our police department kind of fired themselves. So they don't have a police department. And in Minneapolis, the Park and Recreation Board and the University of Minnesota and the public school system, museums, and other venues have basically ended or limited their relationship with the police department. And of course, we know there's been a big focus on Minneapolis with all of the things that have come out. Baltimore City Council approved a $22.4 million budget cut to the police department. Portland City Council cut $15 million from its police budget, and they vowed that $5 million of that would be put towards a new program that would send in unarmed first responders to deal with specifically homeless. And so we talked about in the last episode that they did a study, and 21% on average of a police officer's time is dealing with mentally ill people and transporting them back and forth. And, when we're talking about everything that's on the police department, one of the things that's on them is to deal with homeless people, and they're not really equipped to that. And their time could be spent better. So Portland is saying, hey, we're cutting $15 million, but we're going to do $5 million of people that just go out and specifically deal with homeless, which I think is a good call. Philadelphia canceled a $19 million increase to the police department and shifted $14 million of that to other places, including affordable housing. So not the full shift went there, but some of the money did. Hartford, Connecticut voted to cut and relocate $2 million of its police budget. And in Seattle, basically the mayor of Seattle. So there was this whole, there was where they occupied a couple blocks. What was that called, Stormy? Where they occupied a couple blocks in Seattle?
Yes. I want to say occupy. I don't know what it was called, but yeah. I know what you're talking about. It
was a shit show. It was fucking
right. Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's weird. Like, did you ever have to read Lord of the Flies in school?
Vaguely. I didn't read it in school, but I saw Lord of the Flies, the movie, as a youngster. Okay. I vaguely remember it. Where the kids took over, it was, you know what I mean? So yes, that's the movie, right?
Yeah, that's a movie, and the kids break up into groups, and yep. They start getting more twisted as they go. And so what we saw is the people in Seattle, I think their heart was probably trying to be in the right place at the beginning of it, but then it got twisted, and there was actually some violent crimes that went there. So they're on this whole thing about defunding the police, and then their ass is actually having crimes and hurting people that was within their little community, and they finally busted it up, thank God. And so the Seattle mayor is basically quoted as saying, we have to reallocate parts of the budget to take things out of the police department that shouldn't be there. We have to rethink what remains in the police department. And that just goes back to the police department are trying to do too much stuff. There's other cities where they're looking at changes and the officials are asking for discussion. San Francisco, San Diego, Los Angeles, Oakland, Milwaukee, Denver, Durham, Winston-Salem, Chicago, New York City, and DC. And we're kind of in this weird time right now because the budgets for 2021 are pretty much done. They have been done. So there are these other cities that are saying, yeah, we need to look at this. But of course, the budgets for next year are already completed. So they don't really, they can't really do anything at that point. But the thing that's very important is that how everything always comes back down to money is that even though the whole modernizing the police, defunding the police that people are talking about, they're making it sound like it's a social issue, but everything that I'm reading, it's coming down to numbers. And it's probably that a lot of these cities have wanted to do this for a while. But again, as we talked about on the first podcast, you can't be the politician that's soft on crime. And this gives them a great reason to do the reform and try to get some of their budget line items back under control. I mean, that's just my feeling. What do you think about that, Stormy?
No, absolutely. Yeah, it's I don't even know what I can add to that. Remarkably, you did a good job of explaining that. Wow,
thank you.
You think I would have explained it actually? Yeah,
well, I mean, you sent me the script, so I just followed your script to the T.
There you go. You should continue to do that.
Okay, good. I'm gonna on the second part. I'm gonna continue to do that as well.
Continue along with it.
Yes. And so one of the other concerns is the fact that we have COVID. And right now it might look like, oh, we're going to cut the police funding and we're going to move it to other places. Well, in fact, there could be a significant amount of less tax revenue coming in due to COVID. So it might not have anything to do with reappropriating funds to different parts of the budget. It might just simply be like the fucking money is not there. You know what I mean? And so that's got a lot of people worried. And so when we're looking at, general funds versus the actual police department. So the general funds, and I'm going to get down to some numbers here in a second that are actually very fascinating, that actually I proved myself wrong, which I love when I do that. But the general fund, again, is tax revenues that come in and it's under the discretionary of the city officials to spend as they wish. And when we're talking about the separation between the two budgets, if there's cuts to the general fund of the police department, it does typically mean fewer cops on the street. So, okay. Yeah, which, I mean, when they're like, oh, you're going to take cops off the street. Well, kind of, yeah, if it's a general fund, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you don't replace them with someone else. So that's that whole one-sided argument, right? Where, oh, you're going to put less cops on the street. Well, yeah, but if we take off their workload and we have homeless people helping homeless people and mental people helping mental people, then we don't need as many cops because they're not spread as thin. But see, that they don't want to say that because depending on what side of the political argument you're on, you can skew it however the fuck you want to. You know what I mean? Drives me crazy. I don't like when people use numbers that way. Right. So this is very interesting. So I'm going to run real fast, you guys, through some cities that are actually keeping the same. And in this article that I'll put in the resource, there's a fucking great table. This is straight off Bloomberg, which is a big financial, obviously financial favorite. And so there's some cities that are keeping the same police budget and there's some that are trying to increase them slightly. So Detroit right now, 15% of their general budget, again, not the police budget, the general budget is going to the police, or about $491 per person. Tulsa, 32.4 or $254 of their taxes going towards police. Miami, 32.8 or $570 per head. And then Oakland, 45.3 or $674.
Whoa. In Oakland, 45% of the general budget of that town goes to the police department?
45.3, yes.
How do they pay for anything else?
Yeah, well, I mean
45% towards anything. I don't care what it was. Mm-hmm. 45% towards anything is a significant number. Wow, I had no idea that. Wow, okay.
Yeah, and the thing is that this could be Because, when we think of police officers, we think of salaries. And I've, mentioned on this podcast that I'm not a super fan of unions. And that is my bias. So when we look at all this stuff, we think, oh my God, this is all salaries. So no, this could be police cars. This could be, capital expenditures. This is a lot of other stuff that they might be using to fund the police that doesn't specifically go to salaries, even though they, through everything I've read, when they talk about the general budget, they say, oh, a lot of that goes to salaries. But I actually did some research on one city and specifically, and yeah, I see a good portion of it's going to salaries, but I don't see the amount of money that's allocated for it, which tells me that there's wasteful spending going on there. And we'll get to those numbers here in a minute. Now, there's a couple cities that are actually increasing the police presence, and San Diego is at 38% of their general budget right now, or $399 per head. Now, remember, this is for this last budget cycle, which is pretty much already in the works. So you have a lot of cities that are trying to have this conversation, but it's too late. It's not going to go into the 2022 budget. Sacramento, 25.1 of the general budget, or $305 per head. Phoenix, this is going to come back, 41.5% of their general budget, or $352 per person. Kansas City, 37.5, or $469 per person. And then Mesa, Arizona, 43.5, or $335 per head. And that is going just from the general budget, not including the actual police budgets that they have, that they have set across. And so there is some places that are looking at actually spending more, like in a big way. So Boston is spending in 2012, $315.8 million. And then in 2017, the police general funds equated to $375.5 million. And by fiscal year 2020, the city is spending $414.3 million on their police force, but proposed for 2020 is a drop to $404 million. But still, that's a fuck ton of money. You know what I mean? And so again, a lot of these fundings can come from, debt service, like they could be issuing bonds. There's a lot of pension contributions, which we're going to talk about here in a moment. And there's a lot of other things that go in besides just, paying your cop who's writing you a ticket for speeding, which I've had a lot of, but not recently. Knock on wood. I don't have any wood. There we go. And, so there are cities that are slashing the budget. New York slashed $1 billion in police spending. Los Angeles has cut $150 million and $16 million from the general fund. And Austin, Texas, which I thought was odd because Austin is pretty red, but I know Austin's kind of mixed. They have slashed $144.5 million, and they've done it by a couple ways. They're trimming overtime. They're redirecting some of the money to homeless services and mental health services and family violence prevention, like we've talked about. And they are also moving functions like for forensics and 911 dispatch and other things. They're moving it out of the control of the police department and moving it to more independent ways. So
Austin, I just want to dive in. So Austin, even though Austin's in a red state, Austin's a pretty progressive city within Texas. You have a lot of, Austin is considered the Silicon Valley, the second Silicon Valley. There's just a lot of, even though it's in Texas, there's just a lot of incredible things happening in Austin.
Yeah. And Jesse, before he died, my best friend, the book is dedicated to, was gay. And that was where he wanted to move. And I said, Jesse, do you really want to move to Austin? Because I really don't want anything to happen. He was like, no, Mel, Austin's not like that. And I was like, okay, cool. And unfortunately, he passed before he could ever do that. But that was where he was trying to go. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so Phoenix, Arizona, we talked about Phoenix, Arizona. We talked about them increasing their police budget, and they are increasing it by about 3 million, or like 4.5%, but they're not adding new officers. A lot of the increased spending comes from mostly these pensions. And so I really wanted to look at what is it, you know, because we've talked about pension so many times on this. And I think that that's one of the things, like I wish that we had our grandparents' America where everybody had pensions, but you know, there was the tax law that came through. We did a podcast on it, and I don't remember what season it was in, where we talked about why we went from pension plans that companies had to provide to their employees to defined contribution plans, which is your 401ks. And it was basically this swooping tax law that came through. I think it was on the decade of the 70s where this came through. And then we see 401ks start to come online. And I mean, I would love the fact that, you know, if I could have the comfort of a pension, but what we see a lot of times is these pre-funding requirements on pensions specifically are crippling companies, as we've talked about multiple times on this podcast. So of course I immediately latched onto that, and I'm like, let me run some numbers. So I pulled most of this data, if not 90% of this data, off of the city of Phoenix, Arizona's website. Okay. So this is straight off their thing. I'll put the link in there. And I'm like, what are these police getting? Like, you know, if it's all salaries that these budgets are making up, and it's these pension contributions that are making things go up, but you're not actually adding, you know, people, because I mean, people think, oh, the budget increased, that means more officers. No, motherfucker, that means that there's collective bargaining agreements a lot of times that are in place where there's step ups that have already been agreed to years before that now they have to come due. So if you hear a politician, I increased the budget, you know, of the blah, blah, no, you didn't, fucker, you had to, you know. So that's why it's important to understand these numbers, because people will lie to you and they'll just snow you in their language. And my industry is notorious for that, and I hate that shit. So from the city of Phoenix's Arizona's website, and a police, and this is a general police officer, okay, makes anywhere from $51,000 to $74,000. Okay, that's the range. And so an average between those two would be $62,500. All right. And their pension is on average, and I couldn't get super good numbers, but this is from a couple other sites, 50 to 75% of their salary. So I just took an average of that, which is 62.5. Now, the thing that's important is that there is another article I found that I'll put there. And just like always, when we did, and I think it was in season 1, when we talked about the disparity between like movie stars and stuntmen and how the money falls, there's high-end administration people who have, you know, pensions that are like, you know, 100,000 plus a year, and they pull out some other retirement from the police force of like, you know, $200,000, and that shit's ridiculous. I'm just talking about a normal, you know, cop cruising around, giving you tickets, you know, coming in and doing normal stuff. So we have an average salary of 62,500. We have an average percentage of 62.5. So that's going to put us at about, you know, for retirement pension, about $39,062 a year. Okay. But they also have all these step ups that you get for years of service. And I'm not going to go through the formula, but it's all on the website. If you guys want to look at it, for each year that you have a certain amount of service, they give you, you know, a certain amount of dollar additional up to a maximum. And then after another time period, they give you a little bit more money. And so I'm just looking at a person who comes on the police force and he retires in 30 years and he comes on in his 20s. And so after all of these little additional things are added to him for his years of service based on that formula, you know, we're looking at we're looking at $41,307, which would be an average, based on the information I could piece together from the city of Phoenix's website, would be a police officer's pension in retirement, which doesn't really sound like a lot. I mean, but there's retirees that don't have pensions that get way less in Social Security, way less. And so a police officer has a guaranteed pension of $41,000-ish based on just average information going into retirement. Now, the earliest they can retire is 55. And we're going to assume that they're going to live till 80 because that's just the general age. So that means that the person's going to be 25 years in retirement. So if you take an average of annual, you know, pension of $41,307 and you do it over a 25-year period, you're looking at, for that one officer, assuming that he did not take less benefits. So in the event that he or she passes, that some money can go to the spouse, you're looking at, over a cop's lifetime, assuming all of those things being stagnant, of $1,032,675. Now, included in that is premium medical benefits. So a lot of times what happens, especially if you're talking about somebody who's retiring at 55, this is where this collective bargaining stuff comes in. They are not going to be eligible for Medicare for another 10 years. And I have a lot of clients who in theory could retire early if they didn't have to provide health care for themselves, but they do. However, cops specifically in Phoenix, they will get a pension plus they get a premium medical health care. Now, so $1,032,675 to put an officer from 55 to 80 through retirement, not including his health benefits and other benefits they have. But the Phoenix, Arizona currently has 2,900 officers. So when you take, if you assume all of your officers come in at the same time and leave at the same time, which I know doesn't happen, but I just need to kind of get you guys to wrap your mind around it. That would mean, based on all of these parameters, that the total for funding the pension, not funding the pension, but just getting everybody through their life cycle would be $2,994,757,500. You know, I mean, hey, for the people who have the collective bargaining, I'm not shitting on you guys. I think it's fucking great. I would be awesome if everybody had the collective bargaining, but it is making up a huge amount of the actual budget that is being consumed. And of course, with how unions work, their job is to continue to increase things. And I'm not going to get into an ethical argument about you if cops deserve it or not. That has nothing to do with fucking anything. What I'm telling you is that the salaries and the pensions, not including the premium medical package they're getting, is killing a lot of these cities' budgets. And it is a bigger and bigger portion of the budgets. And on top of that, for the city of Phoenix, just continuing on that so we can close this out, they have paid court overtime. So if they have to go to court outside of their working business hours, they get paid time and a half, and they get paid a minimum of 3 hours. Their vacation is also very nice. Within the first, if they serve 1 to 5 years, they get 12 days of vacation a month, or excuse me, 12 days of vacation a year. 6 to 10 years is 15 days of vacation. 16 to 20 years is 19 days of vacation. Plus they get an additional 20 hours of personal leave on top of that annually. And they get 11 paid holidays. And if they have to work on any of those paid holidays, they get an additional 8 hours. So they don't get time and a half, but they just generally get paid an additional 8 hours. And
wow.
So those are pretty fucking sweet benefits. And I think that part of the conversation that's so hard is that if you say, hey, you know, these pension requirements are crippling the city's budget. And, you know, the deal with pensions, you guys, is that as the city is putting away money to do these pre-funding requirements, that is covering officers that are active and officers that are retired already, they can't invest them. Like, you know, you might put money in a stock market, and the average S&P, the thing that's always quoted is that it gets about 10% a year. Well, the pension funds can't do that. They have to put their money in something safer, which is typically going to be, you know, some type of fixed income product, which is maybe going to return them 3%, maybe on a good day, you know, 5%, but they have to be very conservative. So you have a pension fund that's trying to keep up with inflation. People are living longer, and you have the collective bargaining coming in. And now we have cities just looking at these enormous amounts of money that are going to the police department. And I don't think it really has anything to do with the social issues as much as it's just simply the cities are looking for a way out to either break up some of the collective bargaining things that they've done. And you know, you can't say, I mean, what you're saying, because, you know, I put my life on the line every day. I don't deserve $41,000 a year. Well, no, but what I'm telling you is that the way it's structured is crippling a lot of cities. So it, you know, you got $41,000 a year. It's not a question of, did you earn that 41,000, or are you worthy of that 41,000? It's the fact that, you know, a lot of cities, we're seeing more and more things have to be cut in order to continue to provide you with that $41,000. And of course, that's the difference between public and private sectors. So I don't know. I mean, like I said, I originally was like, it's the pensions and that's what's crippling it. Then I thought, no, it wasn't. But now I'm looking back at the numbers, and in fact, it is. So I'm going back to what I originally thought, which bums me out, because I thought for a second there that I had proved myself wrong, but now I realize I didn't. I don't know. How do you feel about collective bargaining?
Yeah, you know, I don't know much about it. I think, you know, the scenario there is, if I'm the police officer and that was the deal that was negotiated, hey, you work 20 years and you get $40,000 or whatever that deal may be, the expectation would be, if that's what was promised to me, I should get it. Now, moving forward, if the city negotiated a bad deal, you know, whoever does the negotiations, I don't know, if it's determined that, hey, we made a deal that's just not feasible, it can't be one of those things to where, you know, I don't believe in like, okay, we made a bad deal, it's not feasible, I don't think you should go and punish the police officers. I would say, okay, you know what? We're going to negotiate a new deal for anyone else who comes on. We made a bad deal, we goofed, we had bad people in its place, but now moving forward, you know, we'll get through that, but we're not going to continue with the bad deal, just be, you know what I mean? Because precedent says we made bad deals.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. But
That's
I don't
just
know
the way
how,
I see it.
yeah, no, and you know, my grandfather, he was a World War II veteran, and he said, you know, oh, when I signed up, they promised me all this stuff, you know, medical care for life, and you know, all this stuff. You'd never have to worry about retirement. And he said they delivered none of it, and he was in war. And so I agree with you. If it was what was promised, then it was what was fucking promised, and it should be delivered. I guess I'm just concerned because, like, if you're you know how like on the freeway, right? Like, I mean, Los Angeles, you have what, 5, 6 lane freeways on each side. And here in Vegas, you know, they're constant, and in every city, I'm sure they're constantly widening, adding lanes to the freeway. And you think, oh, you know, this is going to make it better, but it doesn't.
Right.
It's actually, there's just more congestion and more lanes. And so that's what I'm kind of afraid of, is I'm afraid of that, you know, they're going to just continue to either add more officers, or they're going to continue to could throw money at a situation, and it's not actually going to help the crime at all. But a politician can't come out and go, hey, look, you know, you can't, dude, you guys, this, you can't do this, because we're literally doing this to sacrifice everything else. And if there is scientific studies out there that prove that you can break off, and I'm sure they would get paid less. I mean, somebody who works with the homeless, salary wise, typically is going to get paid less than a police officer. So if you can free up, you know, 15 to 20 police officers and have, you know, another little squad that goes out and deals with homeless people, that's cheaper. I don't know why that's a conversation that's not being had. But it's just so politicized on each side because they can just swing it however they want to. But the resources are going to be in here. I gave you guys the numbers that I found. You're welcome to do your own research. It's very interesting. And I actually have a friend whose whole job, he's a diehard union guy. His whole job is to go out and start unions, is to solicit the employees of big companies and get them to unionize. And I know Walmart's been a target of this forever. And Walmart's like, fuck it, we're not doing unions, you know? But it would be interesting to have him on here, because maybe he could change my mind about some of my feelings on the union, and where I think it's great that they're doing all this collective bargaining because of the 501c5 status that they have, that they can back political candidates, thus keeping people in office that are backing their agendas, makes them the man. And one of my ex-boyfriends drove for UPS, and he was a diehard union guy. And he was always telling me, oh, you know, UPS, the union protects us from the man. I was like, the union is the man. They're all the man. You know what I'm saying? So anyway, do you got anything to add onto that, Stormy?
Yeah, I think you actually made a great case for modernizing the police. You know what I mean? If we realize we've got some things in place that are unsustainable, I see it as modernizing my budget. People run through this all the time in America. They have a budget, they put things in place, and they realize that they find themselves overextended. So what many of them have to do is like buckle down. Hey, let me modernize my budget. You know what? I don't need the gym membership. I can walk around the neighborhood. That saves me $1.30 a month, or whatever they pay for the gym membership, right? They're like, what else? You know what? I don't need to go out every weekend. I'll go out once a month. That saves me another $300. So it's one of those things where you can look at it, and when someone goes through and they modernize their budget, in that scenario, you can say all things are on the table, but in reality, all things aren't on the table. You have a house payment, you probably still have to continue paying that. But for some people, they're like, I've got too much house. That's on the table. I've got to sell the house and downsize and get a more affordable house to lower my house payment by X amount of dollars per month. So, and in many cases, they end up in a much, much better, you know, situation. So if we talk about modernizing the police, I don't believe in going back on things that were promised. I mean, I never have, and I never will. If it was promised, it's promised. The good deal, bad deal, it was promised. Suck it up, buttercup. But like you said, okay, let's look at what the police officers are doing. If there's studies out there that says that 20% of the time police officers are dealing with the homeless, and that's not their highest and best use, we can get someone for, 60% of that salary. Let's do that times 20. I think that you're absolutely on the money. What are the other things the police are doing? Let's talk about traffic. Now, I don't know if traffic is just about, well, I would imagine when they do traffic stops, they're also pulling people over that have warrants. So you probably need someone that is an actual police officer for that. But there's, like you said, let's identify what do we need police officers for? What don't we need police officers for? And in regards to the functions that the officers are doing, and let's get police officers doing their highest and best use. That's probably going to give them higher job satisfaction also, because guess what? If I'm the guy that says, listen, I want to be a police officer because I want to do things for my, do things that police officer does, I'm sure that they had a vision. Him or her had a vision of what this job was going to be. So let's do a survey. What's the area that police officers like doing? And what don't they like doing? So for instance, let's look at this for scenario. Paperwork. When I was in sales, when I was a salesperson, your most successful salespeople have sales assistants. And the sales assistants do a lot of the paperwork and the mundane tasks that are required, right? So if I'm paying a police officer, what'd you say, $64,000 a year in Phoenix, and if I realize that 50% of their time is doing paperwork, which is not their highest and best use, I'm like, hey, we can get by with 50% less officers. Let's hire administrative assistants for each officer. So each officer gets to share one or two administrative assistants, whatever that happens to work. And then they can do the paperwork. Does that make sense there? So now and that all starts with identifying what are they doing? What's their highest and best use? Who can we get in? That's going to make police officers, and if we have someone that's looking at that type of scenario, I believe it will end up with a scenario to where we're going to save lots of money, modernizing the police system. We're going to have happier officers, I believe. And I think when you have, and you're going to have better employees, better officers, which is better for the community. And you have a scenario where Jim Collins in his book, Good to Great, it's all about the right person on the right bus, sitting in the right seat. And I think that should be done not just in private business, but all forms of government. And I think that would be and then with the money saved, what that can do, you're like, okay, with the money saved, now what do we do? Well, now we have someone that's forward thinking. Well, how can we, let's look at the statistics. How do people end up in crime? I believe the statistics say it comes down to education. So now it's like, okay, and we realize that that's an 18-year proposition. Let's take the money saved. Let's invest that into the educational system. So this way we create this process that is producing less criminals because they have a better education, and then it just progressively gets better and better after that 18-year time span. That's the way I see it. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. And in the economics of discrimination series, we talked about specifically that the biggest gap between whites and non-whites seems to be the education front. And we talked about a variety of reasons why that is. And a lot of them are systemic economic things that are embedded in the system. And so when you're looking at if you have a place that has a high crime rate of perpetuated by non-whites, maybe if you put it into the education system, then you can help close the gap between the whites and the non-whites education system, and then do exactly what you said. So it's all intertwined. And I didn't realize when we started this podcast, because over the last 2 days, I had to go through every single episode and break them out into seasons, so it's easier to find them on your stream. And I'm looking at all the topics we did, and I'm just laughing because some of them are like, oh, fuck, that was horrible. But I love what we're becoming because of the simple fact that everything that I research goes back to something else that we've talked about. And that's why I keep referencing Men Who Built America, Economics of Discrimination, Nonprofit, all of those series that we've done, because all of this stuff is really interlinked. And no, I agree with you, Stormy. And I mean, obviously we're not police officers. And if there's any listeners out there that, want to tell us about ourselves, you're more than welcome to do that. And
if you are, and you want to come on the show, I would love to hear it. And I would love to hear, because remember, we just threw our ideas and our thought process, and we're on the outside looking in. But my guess would be that as an officer, and I'll reach out I have lots of friends that are officers, and I've never had this conversation with them, but my guess would be is when you joined the police force, you joined the police force for a particular reason. And my guess would be that you have functions of your job that you really love to do, and you also have functions of your job that you're like, man, if I can get someone else to do this, that would be great.
The next part of the series, we're going to be covering the police, the actual band, the police, and then we'll see if Stormy can get one of his police officer friends to come on and we can have an open dialogue. I think it's severely needed. And I do think that there is some type of overhaul, but we just have to get over ourselves. And you're right. I mean, everybody has to tighten their own fucking budget. So tighten the fucking budgets, guys. I mean, you know, and I think it's doable, but I think everybody has to stop being so polarized on the issue. And last episode, I forgot to basically do all our sign-offs. So make sure if you have any feedback for us, especially on this episode, you can reach us at 775-537-4352. That's our Google number. It's online 24 hours a day. You can leave us a message there. If you have any ideas for podcasts, you're feeling froggy and you want to leave them for us, please do that. And also you can pick up Stormy's book, The World's Best Buyer Persona System, on Amazon. You can also pick up Finances, Other F Word, Another F Word, Love Mine on Amazon. Follow Lily Lou Mittens on Instagram, and we launched Patreon, and you can find us if you want to support the show and throw us a couple bucks or buy some merchandise. Either way, financesotherfword.com. Our link to Patreon is right there, and we will see you guys in the next episode. Anything to add before we leave, Stormy?
No, we'll see you guys on the next episode.
All right. Peace.
Thank you for listening. Please check back for upcoming episodes and follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Finances, the Other F Word.